Hello everybody, my name is Ryan Peterson. Today I'm going to be going over some basic tools that were going to be in the toolkit of people working copper in the Archaic period in the upper Great Lakes. So some of the basic tools that I have laid out in front of me would have been readily available to people who are in, say, the Upper Peninsula or on Isle Royal or in the surrounding regions when it comes down to working copper. If you feel like working copper on your own, keep your eye open for these if you go to any sort of gravel pit, but this is largely going to depend on many of the resources, and lithic resources specifically, available to you in the area that you are. All of my tools are sourced from Michigan's Upper Peninsula. They are not from archaeology sites. These are from their natural deposits. But the point of these is to try to get them as close to what people would have been using in this region at that time. The first tool I'm going to be talking about is a very simple one and a very basic concept when it comes to working both copper and any metal really. And this is going to be the anvil. Often when we think of anvils, we think of the Wile E. Coyote, very large metal anvil that you'll see portrayed in a lot of westerns. The anvils that people were using in the Archaic period for copper working share the same basic principle. These instead were actually made of stone. Now I have one in front of me. This is a quartzite anvil. You can actually see some of the discoloring where I've been working copper already. And the basic principle that you want here is you want something that's large, you want it solid, and you want something that's going to be able to take a beating. And this is why this one is made of quartzite. Other materials such as granite or basalt also make really good hammerstones because they're able to take that sort of pounding when you are working the copper. You also want a surface that's going to be appropriate for working copper. In my case, I try to choose anvils that have a nice flat surface, and they need to be wide enough for the type of copper tool that you want to be making. Now, of course, people weren't only limited to lithic materials, but they also had other organic materials. If you'll notice, the kind of table I'm using is actually a tree stump, and a hardened piece of wood like this one's actually been pounded onto and been used by many of the jewelry and metalworking students here at the Ashkenazi School of Art and Design at Indiana University. But this would also work very well to work copper and to produce the tools that you need. So you could either use something like this, a nice stump that has a hard surface. Of course, the wood on this is going to need to be hard and not break apart. You do run the risk, if you're doing a lot of working, of forcing your piece down into the wood material though. So oftentimes you're going to want a piece that is nice, solid, and that's made of lithic stone, particularly a stone that can take this type of abuse. The next thing that you're going to want if you're going to be working native copper is going to be a hammerstone. And I have a couple different hammerstones laid out in front of me here. Now, hammerstone really is going to depend size-wise on what you're trying to do and the piece you're trying to work. If you're trying to work a larger piece of copper and need a little more force behind it, you're going to choose a larger hammerstone. And again, hammerstones need to be made of a durable material. Often these are going to be made of things such as quartzite or basalt or granite, and these are very readily available along the shores of Lake Superior and at other inland locations, again, depending where you are on a map. This one is very large. We also have a couple different kinds here. I have my favorite one actually is made of quartzite. It actually has a lot of damage wear to it since it is my favorite. This one's a good medium size one. It fits really well in my hand. If you're choosing one for yourself to do some copper working, this is one of the first criteria. If it doesn't fit well in your hand, it's not going to work well for working, no matter what size it is. This has a good heft to it, so it's going to allow me to swing it and to get a lot of momentum behind it when I am trying to work a piece of copper. For more delicate working, I have a lot lighter of a hammerstone. This is a really fine granite material. It's kind of got a teardrop shape, and it's really good due to its shape for working more delicate materials, such as the forming of copper beads. Now, while copper working and while finishing up afterwards, another really important tool is an abrader. For this, I use red sandstone taken from the shores of Lake Superior. I have two pieces here. This one here, also kind of a teardrop shape, is a very fine grit red sandstone taken from the Keweenaw Bay area, and it provides a really good surface for grinding down the copper piece. Very similar to what you would think about a modern grinder in a metal shop, or even sandpaper. Again, sandstone, sandpaper. Another piece I have here is a lot more coarse grained. It's smaller. This is actually the one that I have with me while I'm working copper. As you're working copper, you often get little pieces breaking off. The layers start to peel apart. I'll talk about this more in a future video when I actually get into copper working, but this works really well for abrading these small pieces off, these small scales off of the piece. And of course, one of the most important things you need for working copper is the copper itself. Now, all of the copper I use is coming from the Keweenaw area. It is all native copper. I intend to use a lot of float copper because this is what I have available to me through the sources that I procure my copper. Here in front of me, I have a couple pieces of float copper that can be used for working. You can see that these still have the patina on them, which is going to be that outside corrosive layer that you see when you think of a corroded piece of metal, right? Oftentimes, I actually end up getting these pre-cleaned. Somebody would find them and they would clean them, and then I would be able to purchase them for my purposes here and my work here. So they often come in a very shiny form. And really the end goal in this is to try to form a artifact, right? I also have a couple pre-formed pieces in front of me, which I won't zoom too far in on. But basically, you want to end up with a byproduct that can resemble a tool that people would have been using in the Archaic a long time ago. Another really important tool that may not have been used per se in the past that I personally use when I'm working is a pair of goggles for safety. Pieces can fly up at you and you can potentially get stuff in your eye when you're working this. So safety first when you are working copper, and have your eye protection as well as have appropriate clothing. Now, when working copper, there's another tool that I don't have in front of me that I wanted to talk about real quick, and that's going to be the annealing process. I will talk more about the annealing process of copper, cold hammering and annealing in the future, but when annealing copper, you need a heat source. Traditionally, this would be done with a wood fire. You would then be able to put the piece into the fire, and then you would be able to determine when the piece is annealed, both by the time it's been in there, but also by the coloring of the copper piece. Is going to get that nice dull cherry color, showing you that it is reaching the proper temperature. But more about that in a future post. The one thing that I don't do that's traditional actually is my annealing process. For that, I use an air gas torch. That is because I am recording this in a metal studio on my college campus, so I am unable to actually access a wood fire. Why that would be preferable, it's the one thing I'm unable to do, but I try to keep everything else as close to the original as I can. I try not to cheat and use any sort of metal anvils or metal hammers, and try to stick with the lithic materials that would have been available. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please stay tuned for future videos about copperworking.